Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Just in case I haven't deserted anyone, for the last 6 weeks I have been at Eastminster Presbyterian Church, which is probably only a mile or two away on Asheville Highway, as their pastor was away on a sabbatical for 6 weeks to give him a break. So I think that's a church that's close by that would love to do some stuff with us. So perhaps we'll have a chance to do some things together. But it's good to be back, and thank you for also asking about my son Nathan, who's stable, and I appreciate your prayers. Maybe some of y'all are like me and a little bit tired this morning as we stayed up late last night to watch our Tennessee Vols. I understand. And I don't know why. I guess it's the sadistic part of me. But after the game was over, I went to my phone to look on Twitter to search on Tennessee Vols, Tennessee football, to search on Fitz-Jones. About a third of those tweets I cannot repeat here at church. And just so many people are just so frustrated. And they just are tired of getting beat. Just feel like things should be so much different. And just demanding that somebody in power stand up and change this and let's get on with it. And I guess overall just wanting some hope. And I understand that. But football's of small importance here today. I guess I'm asking about you. And do you at all feel like that? I mean, do you feel almost like I'm just tired of losing? I'm tired of just getting beat. I'm weary. I'm ready for somebody in power to stand up and help my situation. And I need some hope today. And I want us to look together at a passage which maybe, I don't know, maybe more than any other, can really speak to that situation if you find yourself there at all today. If you'd open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. We'll begin reading at verse 3. And as I read this is God's Word, which is living and active. And everything else you and I read this week, and Harvey Weinstein, and presidents, and this and that, they're all going to fade away. But God's Word doesn't fade away. It stands forever. And it's the truth. Beginning at verse 3. Now Israel, who was Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. He made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and couldn't speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood up, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." And then skip to verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and they threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with the spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, the brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy isn't there. Where can I turn now?" And they got Joseph's robe. They slaughtered a goat, and they dipped the robe in blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see if it's your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe." Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning I'll go down to the grave to my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph to Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. Heavenly Father, we just pray that you would just fill this place with your Spirit, that God, your word, which has a power and a life on it, would enter each one of our hearts, that a fool like me would be moved out of the way, God, that we would see the Lord Almighty this day. And God, that you would enter those inner chambers of our own heart to get into places where no human word can ever go. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So if you're an outline thinker, our 3 big points today are going to be the path to the pit, the preparation in the pit, and the purpose for the pit. This, how do you get into these pits? And what is going on in the midst of it? And what could possibly be the purpose for being thrown into dark places? I would just say we'll begin here by taking a look at each one of these characters. We have Jacob, who's the father, and he has a large family. He has 12 sons. Joseph is almost the youngest. He has a younger son, Benjamin, who's a little bit younger. And then you've got these brothers who are there, and of course Joseph. And how in the world does Joseph get into this dark place of being thrown into this cistern? And I think each one of them had a hand in it. The first thing that you see, our first verse that we read, is that Jacob loved Joseph more than any other sons, and he made him this special robe. I guess the reason was, yes, he was born to his old age, but you might remember the story of Jacob, that he fell in love with a lady named Rachel, and that's who he wanted to marry. And Rachel had, her firstborn child was Joseph. So Joseph was the son of the wife that he really loved. Jacob came from a kind of a messed up family, a little bit, and maybe you do too. Maybe there's none of us that really have a family that's really normal. Perhaps we're all a little dysfunctional. You might remember Abraham, this great father of faith. And then Abraham has a son named Isaac, this promised son. And then Isaac marries a woman named Rebekah. And Rebekah was from one of Abraham's brothers. They had children and children. So they were kind of in the same family, distant, long-distant cousins. And then, remember, Rebekah had 2 children. She had twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau was the firstborn. And you might remember that Rebekah wanted her younger son, Jacob, to get the father's blessing. See, Rebekah had a favorite too, and that was going to be Jacob. Jacob was more the kind of demure guy that stayed in and cooked, and Esau was the big outdoorsman, the hairy guy. So Rebekah says, honey, why don't you put on, let's go kill a goat, put some goat skin on your arm, and your father can't even see anymore, so you go in there and get his blessing and pretend you're hairy Esau. And he goes in and he gets the father's blessing. Well, Esau's ready to kill him. So Jacob runs out. And where does he run to? He runs to a guy named Laban. Laban was his uncle. That's Rebekah's brother. Well, he sees this beautiful Rachel. That's the daughter of Laban. He says, I want to get married to her. And Laban tricks him. And he sends Leah in, who apparently is not as pretty, and has her all veiled up. He marries her. Long story short, he has to work for this guy for 14 years to finally end up with Rachel. He ends up with Leah too. And then there you go. So I say all that to go, there's a lot of trickery in this family. You might remember Abraham, when he was in trouble with beautiful Sarah, he lied and said, man, that's not my wife, that's my sister. And then you got Laban over here, who's part of the family, who lies and goes, hey, I'm going to switch my daughters, and I'm going to send Leah in and get her married. You got Rebekah. She kind of likes to trick around a little bit. And she's got goat hair on her son to try to get his blessing. And I just say this, like it or not, and I know you're not going to like it, we're all a product of our upbringing. We are. It's all a part. And I know we all roll a little bit different way, but it's how you and I grew up. It's the way my daddy did. It's the way my mother was. And you know what? Sometimes we swing all the way to the other end and go, I'll do anything in the world, but I'm not going to be like my mother, or I'm not going to be like he was. But then you get a little older and you start to notice, boy, that was like my dad. Where did that come from? So how did you grow up? Was there anybody in your household that, I don't know, maybe the way they rolled is when there's a little trouble, they're going to put you on a guilt trip. Oh yeah. They know exactly how to make you feel guilty, get you to do what they want you to do. Or maybe there was somebody else. They don't do that. Oh, but they get real quiet. They're going to give you some freezer burn. I'll show you. We're not going to talk. I'm not going to get any affection. I'm cutting it off. I'm going to show you. You're going to miss my communication until you finally bow the knee, and then maybe I'll talk a little more. And then there's others, like my dad. Brother, there was a temper. There wasn't no freezer burn. You got burned right off the bat. He can let you know where you were. It was intimidation and threats is what was going to happen. And there you go. So what's amazing in this story and ironic is that Jacob, who deceived his father with the skin of a goat, ends up being deceived by his own sons, by the blood of a goat, as the robe is dipped in there. So, contribution to this going to the pit is we've got some dysfunctional family traits that everybody's sharing in. And also, he's got this favoritism thing going on. You know, he makes it obvious that Joseph is his favorite. Everybody knows that he loves him. He's even made this special robe, and scholars disagree whether it was a multicolored robe or whether it was one that came down to your wrists and your ankles, which would be worn by a boss or a manager that didn't have to do physical labor. Regardless, it was obviously he was the boy of distinction, and his brothers hated him for that. And we're grateful today that God is a God that doesn't show partiality. Romans 2:11 says God doesn't show favoritism. God doesn't have favorites. He doesn't have favorite races. He doesn't have favorite ages. It doesn't matter if you're smart or if you were slower or if you're big or if you're small or if you're this way or if you're that way. God loves these people that are all made in his image. And he doesn't have favorites like we see in this story. My father did. I have two older sisters, and my oldest sister was she's just like my dad. She's built like him, big and thick, big boned, strong. She's the bull in the china shop. She'd give you the shirt off her back. She's just kind and generous. Doesn't really think through things real well, but very sweet. And the younger sister, she's much more thoughtful. She's smaller. She's never felt like Dad liked her. And then my older sister, I remember back in the days when they had powder puff football games and the girls would wear the pads, they would just give my sister Gail the ball. She'd put her head down and everybody else was a bowling pin. She'd knock everybody. And my dad would laugh. He just loved it. She knocked everybody over. And it was only a week ago that I was talking to the younger sister, and Dad's passed away now for years. And she says, you know, Daddy never really did like me like he liked Gail. And you could just see the pain. And that's what's going on in this family that has brought a lot of problems. So not only has Jacob contributed to them, look at what Joseph does. It says in verse 4, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. So Joseph has to know that his brothers don't like him. And look at the next verse. Joseph has a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So not only does Joseph already know everybody doesn't like him, and he's the special boy, he's got a dream where these brothers bow down, and he tells them the dream. You know that's going to make them mad. And so help me, it's not over. If you go to verse 9, he has another dream, and he tells it to his brothers. And I just say this. Have you ever met somebody that can't read a room? I mean, they just don't. They just talk when you shouldn't talk. They say things they shouldn't say. It's like they've got no self-awareness. They don't get it. And this Joseph is making matters worse. I'll give you a quick story, just because it'll be a free counseling session for me. So I did a job, our little business did a job in Nashville where we put in some windows in an apartment complex. Worst job ever. It seemed like a third of the windows, somehow the glass got flipped around and they looked like different colors. So now I've got this superintendent saying, I don't know what you sent me, but they're all wrong, they're all flipped around, they don't look right. So I call the manufacturer. The manufacturer says, well, we'll take care of it. About a month goes by. I keep the guy says, when's somebody coming? So then I call, when's somebody coming? Well, we thought it was done. It's gone like this for months. And so finally they got that part corrected. And then the next shipment came, they were screwed up too. And then they got fogged up glass. And then I've got this superintendent who thinks I'm completely an idiot, a total idiot. And we don't have any clue what we're doing, which could be true, but I don't like to hear that. And then, finally, there's some woman raising Cain who has fogged up glass. And in September 1, we sent in a request. It should have been done. This company lost it. And now we're in October. And I said, the dog ate the homework again. And this guy doesn't even care anymore. I'm just his punching bag. And I write the meanest email I've ever written to this manufacturer. I mean, just nobody will stand up. Nobody will take care of it. We did this. We've done that. Blah, 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 blah. I insist. As a matter of fact, I don't know what else to do. I'll not pay another bill. I don't know what to do. Do I get an attorney? What do I do to make you finally do right? But it's driving me crazy. It's terrible. So, last week, Wednesday night, at 11:58, when I had to get up to go to the restroom because I'm almost 60, I go in there, and I know I shouldn't do it, but I take my phone, and I'm glancing at the weather, I'm looking at the news headlines, and I look at emails, and the guy who is over all the service for this manufacturer has written me, where he says, I went to that job a long time ago. I think they're exaggerating things. And on top of it, I don't think you've ever been to this job. And part of our requirements on Form 104 is you have to be to this job. And so I think their Sexton Kitchens has something to do with this. And now I'm wide awake. And I'm writing this guy back. And I'm like, that is insulting. It's this, it's that. I mean, I've been there twice myself as a punching bag. And by the way, it's the thing, the company's not even, I don't even do anything with kitchens. And I say all that to go, you know what he couldn't do? He couldn't read a room. That wasn't the right thing to be writing me right now. He should have been saying, I am so sorry, we'll get this fixed. Please, I apologize, I'll take charge of this. And there's people in your life and mine, as like Joseph did, maybe he would have been better. You know what? There was a guy, it's a great word. Never miss a good opportunity to keep your mouth shut. Sometimes it's just better just to keep your mouth shut and just don't say anything. And Joseph has made it worse. And then finally, you see the brothers. It's a terrible thing. They are incredibly envious and jealous. And I know what you're thinking. Well, that's not so bad. I mean, if you go to Galatians 5, they have the fruits of the Spirit, but right before the fruits of the Spirit, they have kind of almost like the fruits of the sinful nature. Really bad stuff here. Let me give you an example. Sexual immorality, idolatry, witchcraft, orgies, bad stuff. Really bad. Now, those are sins. Those are really big sins. But you know what is also in that list of the most horrible, ugly things? Jealousy and envy. That doesn't seem so bad. And there it is right in there mixed with witchcraft and orgies and everything else. And these brothers were jealous and envious of what they didn't have. And it's a terrible thing that really darkens a heart and ends up leading to bitterness and resentment and eventually to hatred. And is there anybody in your life with whom you're just jealous and envious, and you look at them and you say to yourself, it's not fair. Life's not fair. I didn't get a wife like that. I didn't get a husband like that. I didn't get a bank account like them. I worked harder than they did. I should have been promoted. They don't treat me the way they do others. And then suddenly we're back to the original sin, because that's exactly what happened at the fall of man. They had the whole paradise. And they started thinking, well, how come I don't get that one fruit? How come the snake over here gets it, but I don't? I mean, what it is? God's holding back. That's what it is. He's not being fair to me. Oh, he's fair. Oh, he blesses everybody else and gives them all the stuff. And they've got their little happy little life over there. And they don't worry about their bills. And their car runs fine and everything else. Oh, but not me. Oh, no. Just go ahead, Lord. Just throw it on me. Let me try to work it all out here. Doesn't seem right to me. No, sir, I'm not content. And yes, I am envious. And it leads to a terrible thing. Does the enemy today have you focused on something you don't have? That you feel like really should be yours. And you're angry about it. I am. And I sit there and I could ask myself the question. The answer is yes. And I think deep down I have anger about some things. And it doesn't feel fair. Well, so all that to say, this path to the pit was contributed with Jacob's favoritism and Joseph talking too much maybe and getting himself in trouble, and these brothers full of jealousy and envy. So the next thing you know, they put Joseph in this cistern, this hole in the ground. They were going to leave him there to die. And why in the world would God permit that? What happens when you're in a pit? And today you may say, well, I'm not in a hole in the ground. But I promise you, there's some of us here, believe me, you are in a hole. You're in a dark hole. It's a tough place to be. When you're in a hole, you can't get out. It's not something that you can write a check for or make a phone call to mama to get me out of this. When you're in a hole, it doesn't change. You throw up some prayers and you try to do the right things, but you're still in the hole. You see, you're caught, you're stuck. A hole will humble you. A hole makes you remember that I just have feet of clay. And maybe there was a day I thought I was something else, but I'm pretty weak. A hole has some of the preparation that happens in the hole. As awful as I know it seems, I really do think God is preparing you. I would say, before you can hold his power, there's something that has to come into your life, and that is a deep brokenness. You have to know that I know who I am. You know, the real gospel. For most of us, we're in the middle of the road. I'm not that bad, but I need Jesus to get to heaven. And, I do pretty good. I'm a lot better than them. But the real gospel is you and I are far worse than we ever could possibly imagine. And on the other extreme, you and I are far more deeply loved than you could have ever dared hope. It's a much greater extreme than you and I usually hold together. And there's something about a hole that makes me remember that, like the Lord knows, I'm but dust. I have nothing without him. Suddenly we start to really reach out to the Lord in earnestness because we have nowhere else to go. Matthew 23 says, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Humility is not thinking less about yourself. It's thinking about yourself less. I've told you this story that 3 days after 9/11, and just by a weird circumstance, I'm in Billy Graham's bedroom as he's getting ready to go to Washington to lead the National Day of Prayer. And they're sending a plane for him, and I'm just trying to get out of the room. He's obviously got stuff to do, And he stood up and he goes, no, don't go. And he said, what should I say? I don't know. I probably have a booger in my nose. Now, who am I? I'm nobody. I don't know anything. And then before I left, he said, well, would you just pray with me? And there I stood. It was like a surreal moment. I'm holding his hands and praying. And I say that story because, and you've heard me say it before, but as I drove away, I thought, I see why God can use him. Because he still thinks he's a dairy farmer's son. He's not some celebrity preacher. He literally thought some dodo from Knoxville, I want him to hold my hand and pray with me because I don't feel like I'm worthy and I'm ready. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, Billy don't know. Nobody knows. Humility happens in the pit. It also does hem you in, doesn't it? There's times that we're pretty versatile and we can do stuff. I can make some phone calls. I can call some friends. I can call in some favors. It's not like I don't know how to survive, because I do. And yet sometimes a pit, God allows that to happen. Because now the ways that you normally cope and survive, well, they don't work so well anymore. You're going to have to develop some deeper, more biblical, more rooted, more eternal ways of coping with things. Because now you just can't get yourself out of this one. Now you're in a mess. Now all of a sudden, you're a father like me, and with the son with brain cancer, and we've done Timidar, and I had hopes for that chemo drug, and we did radiation with the mask and the whole thing, and yet he had regrowth. Well, that's okay. Let's get back up. Let's make our phone calls. Let's do our studying. Let's Google everything. Okay, here we go. We've got a clinical trial. We'll do that one. And it's a brand new drug, and it's supposed to ignite your own immune system to fight it. Okay, here we go. We've done it. Let's go. And so now we go to that one. And then we do it for a while, and then all of a sudden there's regrowth again. And so now we're going to Avastin and a much stronger chemotherapy drug. And finally, and those are fine, and of course we do all that we can for the people that we love. But my point is, for me, God is sitting there saying, you're going to have to find deeper roots than the next chemical. You're going to have to find something else besides the next little hope on the medical horizon. I want you to reach down and start to find and hold on to eternal. Well, I know those, Lord. Yes, you know them, but you don't live them. When the pressure comes on, you don't have them in your hands. They're loose to you. They're verses on a dashboard. They're not in you. And when you get squeezed and pressed, you start to collapse. And God says, that's not what I want for you. We're going to keep you in the pit. We're going to hold you there as I do deep tissue work on your heart as these truths get deeply pressed into your soul. Because from now on, you'll have stories to tell, and you need a hope that goes beyond your next thing that you're holding on to in your mind. Your ultimate hope is me. The battle is the Lord's. And we sing the hymns, and we know the verses, and we say our prayers, and yet this seems to be for each one of us always the lesson that we have to keep relearning. That whatever battle you and I are in, it's God's battle. That we rest in Him. That sometimes the hole is the place where God says, I want you to be still. And know what? And know that I'm God. Not you. I'm God. And I've already told you over and over, if you're in my hand, nobody's going to pry you out. I've told you that there are promises. And you're rending your hands, you're scared, but you don't believe. Oh, you have believed. We sit there and laugh at those little disciples in the boat. That's us. You know, as soon as the pressure gets on, I'm like, oh Lord, this boat's going to sink. And he goes, oh, you have little faith. Have you been with me this long and you still are afraid? Well, there's a lot that happens in a hole. But a hole does help us. A.W. Tozer says it's doubtful that God will ever use us greatly until we have been hurt deeply. sometimes God does have to hurt you to help you. Amen. Well, how in the world does this little Joseph survive in the pit? I mean, how does he, he goes on, the story. He gets sold into slavery. He's a very faithful steward in Potiphar's house. The woman tries to seduce him. He runs away. She says, oh, he tried to rape me. And then the captain of the guard, the husband, has him put down in prison. And he's rotting away in a prison. He's faithful there. He tells some guy that knows the Pharaoh himself to remember him when he tells dreams, and the guy forgets him. I mean, it's a terrible series of things, and yet we keep seeing Joseph, after this whole experience, be nothing but very faithful. And then I've wondered about that this week as I thought about this. And I don't know, this is just hopefully a sanctified imagination. But I do think that maybe what happened in that hole that helped him, that may help you and I, is what I never really remembered, but I went back to look at timelines. Isaac, his grandfather, is still alive. When he was thrown in that hole, Isaac was still there. And Isaac would have been close to Joseph. And don't you know that Isaac, at some point in Joseph's life, had him up on his lap and said, son, I'm going to tell you the greatest story of my life. We were traveling up a mountain one day with my own father, and they bound me. And your great-grandfather, he tied me up and put me on a pile of wood. I was about to die, Joseph. I was done. My own family was going to do me in. And you know what? God provided. God provided a ram, and suddenly, and Joseph, whenever you are in your life, God will provide, even if you think that life is being squeezed out of you. Trust in the Lord. And I wonder if Joseph down in that pit thought, my own family has tried to kill me, and God will provide. So we do have these promises. So, what is the purpose of this pit? And here comes the good part of the sermon. Maybe the other part. I hope it's good. At least it's been good for me. I don't know about everything else, but if you didn't hear anything else, listen now. What I love about this passage is it could be exactly like some of your life right now. There's no mention of God. He's not visible. You don't see him. He's not evident. There's no big miracles. His name's not even mentioned here. And there are these seasons in your life and in mine. Really, God just doesn't seem to be very present. I'm not saying in a theological sense we know that he's there. I'm talking about how it feels in here. That it just doesn't feel like he's very close to me like he was in other times in my life. And yet, the ironic thing is, I suppose there's no other